Sunday, February 8th, 2009. Snow crunched under Garrett Cosma's feet as he made his way through the woods of northern Minnesota. His shoes and a large area of his pants were soaking wet from the occasional deep patch that his legs had sunken into. His arms were drawn into his jacket and wrapped around his torso, vigorously rubbing his chest to battle the cold, which was made worse by the whipping wind. A large gray wolf walked at his side and began to speak in the Garrett tongue.
I still can't believe you insisted on making this trek in Ahmed the entire time. Would have been there already if you'd taken lupus and you wouldn't be shivering like a damn fool.
I'm fine, Ulf. Garrett had been tasked to take a message to one of the war leaders of the Sept of the Two Harbors. It was populated by the Tryggvasons, a large clan made up of Geta Fenris and Black Furies who shared a common ancestry. The Sept was located deep in the woods, and unfortunately, had no Moonbridge connection between it and Chicago, which forced Garrett to set up a rendezvous with an escort in the nearby city that provided the Sept's namesake. He met Ulf Tryggvason at a bar run by kinfolk, then joined him on a motorcycle ride into the woods until the pathways became too treacherous from snow and ice. Ulf spoke again.
I get it. You want to impress me with a show of strength, but fuck, man, even the toughest Finner would be driven mad by this cold if they had to endure it in Hamid.
Lucky for me, I'm not Fenrir. Ulf let out a hearty bark of laughter before replying.
Ha! Fair enough. You're okay, Garrett Cosma.
The sad truth was that Garrett was not trying to boast to make a good impression. The sky was gloomy and overcast from the rotten weather, but it was still day, which was Garrett's bane. He had never been able to completely control his shape-shifting while Helios resided in the sky. Shifting during the day required an enormous amount of concentration, usually left him mentally exhausted, and was unreliable. No Theurge could determine any reason behind it, leading to a variety of theories. The most prominent one pointing to the weak Cosma bloodline as the culprit. Everyone in Chicago knew about it, which provided an endless source of ridicule, so he savored any opportunity to keep it hidden. Garrett and Ulf continued the journey through the woods for another agonizing hour, until they were accosted by another large gray wolf with a stern look. It spoke in a low monotone.
Oi, Ulf. Who's the scrawny one you got there?
Garrett didn't react to the insult. It was the truth, and he'd heard far worse.
Oi, Oscar. Why don't you ask him yourself?
Oscar didn't speak again. He merely glared at Garrett until the implied question became obvious. I am Garrett Cosma, Shadow Lord, Rakabash and Cleeth, carrying a message for Rens the Flesh of the Sept of the Two Harbors. Oscar's face was unchanged by the answer, and continued to glare at Garrett's shivering frame. Ulf broke the silence.
He's okay.
Oscar's face immediately brightened along with his voice.
Well shit, why didn't you say so sooner? One sec.
Oscar trotted ahead some distance before planting his paws into the snow and unleashing a booming howl that rung through the woods.
The Sept of the Two Harbors accepts Garrett Cosma, Cleeth, child of thunder, born under the hidden moon. He's okay.
Once Oscar finished the howl, he motioned for Garrett and Ulf to follow him deeper into the woods. It wasn't too long before they began to hear murmurs of activity coming from ahead. Garrett could see the tree line end with numerous identical buildings, which appeared to be dwellings, just past it. They eventually made their way past the buildings, revealing a large clearing that was swarming with activity from members of the Sept. More of the identical dwellings circled the entirety of the clearing, with the exception of a single, enormous building at the northern edge of the circle. Oscar stopped to speak.
Okay, I need to head back out to the barn. You got this from here, Ulf?
Oh yeah, I can show him to the wormful.
Good. Welcome to the Sept of the Two Harbors, son of thunder.
A simple thanks was all Garrett could muster from his mouth as he surveyed the firestorm of activity before him. Lit braziers peppered the courtyard that was bustling with activity from a large mixture of kin and Garou. There was not one idle person and not a single grown man in sight without a full beard and biker jacket. Several fight circles were formed throughout as both men and women engaged in contests of strength and dominance. Motorcycles roared in one corner of the Sept as a gang of Tryggvasons tried to determine whose engine was the loudest, while an irritated mechanic shouted at them.
Will you fuckers go make your engines fart somewhere else? I'm trying to concentrate here, don't you know?
Ulf began walking north and motioned for Garrett to follow.
Wormfo's dwelling is right next to the Great Hall, clear across Set. I suggest buckling your seatbelt and keeping your hands inside the vehicle as we make our way. We seem to be pretty rowdy today.
Garrett hurried up to catch up to Ulf, staying at his side. They began to weave their way through the heavy foot traffic. Garrett began to feel the chill of the woods slowly fade away as they passed by the dancing flames of the braziers. The comfort of warmth allowed Garrett to take in more of his surroundings. He could hear the clanking of bottles as people toasted victories in the fight circles. He heard the curses of defeat as someone had to pay a bet they lost. Off in the distance, he saw a group of children gathered around an elderly gentleman who no doubt was regaling them with the stories of the glory days of his youth. Also not in doubt was that the blows he dealt to the children's heads with a rolled-up newspaper were due to them questioning the veracity of such tall tales. Ulf seemed completely unfazed by the surrounding melee, calmly issuing simple commands to Garrett such as
Duck.
and
Left.
to avoid flying objects or brawls that occasionally spilled outside of the ring. As they neared the Great Hall, the doors to the enormous building swung open, revealing a portly man wearing a chef's apron, whose bearded face was full of fury as he shouted,
Otto! Otto!
Eventually, one man separated himself from the crowd and ran towards the chef at full speed, showing throat once he stood before him.
Yes, Raya?
The chef stood straight up and stroked his beard.
You know, we got a feast tonight, right, boy?
Yes, Raya.
You know, we need meat for a feast, right, boy?
Yes, Raya.
So, where's the damn meat? I was supposed to be cooking half an hour ago.
Otto's face sunk as the realization of his mistake sunk in.
Oh, jeez, Raya, well, you see, Hendrik bet me that Wilhelm could knock out Stefan Alexander's teeth in one round, and I said, oh, bet you he can't. And so we got to betting about this, and pretty soon I was...
Butcher the damn cow, Otto!
Without further hesitation, Otto turned around and sprinted towards the animal pens where the livestock were gathered, shifting to lupus form and leaping over the fence and lunging at the cow's throat.
Well, he got lucky.
Garrett could only marvel at the events going on in the sept. Poor Otto would have been disciplined within an inch of his life if he had made that mistake in Chicago. Worse, Otto would probably dole out punishment to the kinfolk that more than likely would have been responsible. Garrett continued to think about the differences between this sept and his home one, but was interrupted by someone crashing into his side. Garrett quickly caught his balance and saw two girls, no older than 12, sprinting away while occasionally glancing back with looks of terror on their faces, while a shriek of fury built up to a crescendo from behind him.
Heidi, Rachel, if you don't give it back, I'll chop off your feet and let Moonin peck your eyes out.
Garrett glanced behind him and saw a blonde girl, roughly the same age as the previous two, running faster than a girl of her size had any right to. Her posture looked similar to a Krynos-formed Guru that was about to rip apart a Fomori. She blew past Ulf and Garrett, but then began to gradually slow down to a trot, and then a complete stop. She turned around and looked directly at Garrett with a piercing stare as if she was sizing him up. His own eyes began to involuntarily narrow at the perceived challenge from the girl. She eventually got a puzzled look on her face before running off to chase her prey once more. Garrett turned to Ulf.
What was that about?
Don't pay her no mind. That's just Lily Jr. being herself. She's inherited all her mother's fury, but none of her sense. Now come on, we're almost there.
Garrett watched Lily Jr. as she ran away, not knowing quite what to make of the exchange. But the young kinfolk seemed a bit unhinged, and Ulf didn't seem to be concerned anyway. They continued onward to the dwelling at the immediate right of the Great Hall. When they reached the door, Ulf shifted back to Hamid form and knocked on the door. A deep voice responded from within.
Door's open.
Ulf opened the door and stepped inside with Garrett following behind him. The home was modestly decorated with simple wood furniture and bearskin rugs on the floor. The hearth crackled with a comforting flame that was heating up a cast iron kettle. At the back of the home was an enormous man setting two mugs on a round table. He was at least 7 feet tall and had to have weighed over 300 pounds. He looked at Ulf and Garrett.
What can I do for you, gentlemen?
Ulf pointed a thumb at Garrett.
This one here is a message.
Garrett stepped forward and bared throat. Rends the flesh, Raya. I am Garrett Combs. Both Ulf and the enormous man erupted into hearty laughter, interrupting Garrett's introduction. The inhabitant of the home shook his head and pretended to wipe away a tear.
You're lucky she wasn't here to hear you say...
It was his turn to be interrupted as the front door swung open. Standing in the doorway was what best could be described as a Valkyrie. She wore a full suit of chainmail with a sword attached at the hip and a winged helm upon her head. Every step she took was heavy and forceful. Garrett noticed Ulf stand up straight and bare his throat, so he mimicked the action. She glanced around at everyone within the home before her gaze settled upon the large man.
Coffee, now.
The large man quickly grabbed the kettle from the hearth and poured the boiling water into a glass container that held coffee grounds. While waiting for it to brew, the woman unfastened the sword from her hip and hung it on a wall mount. She bent her head slightly forward and removed her helm, then whipped her head back, revealing flowing red locks. Her serious countenance remained throughout the process of removing her armor, while the three gentlemen remained silent. After she had stripped down to the modest padded garments, she sat at the round table, while the large man poured coffee into the mug before her. Without adding cream or sugar, she took a healthy swig of the hot coffee, and let out a prolonged sigh before speaking.
Well, now that's over with, I suppose I should ask what the hell Ulf and the world's saddest toothpick are doing in my home.
Ulf stepped forward.
Worm for Raya. This man carries a message for you.
No wonder they laugh so hard.
Garrett then stepped forward himself.
Rends the flesh, Raya. I am Garrett Cosma, Shadow Lord Ragabash and Cleath, from the Sept of the Windcatchers in Chicago. I bring a message and was told you would know its purpose and who it was from upon hearing it.
A look of concern formed on Rens the Flesh's face as she stood up and took a place next to the large man. Though he towered over her, it did nothing to diminish her fearsome visage. She gestured for Garrett to continue.
Well then, let's have it.
Garrett breathed in before speaking.
I have you now, Tryggvason.
The look of concern instantly gave way to rage. She clenched her fist and delivered a powerful haymaker to the large man. The sudden nature of the attack caught him off guard, and he found himself falling backward, windmilling his arms forward in a futile attempt to regain his balance, before finally crashing into the round table, breaking it in half. The worm foe of the Sept paced about the room with her hands on her hips, staring at the ground while the large man rubbed at his jaw and yelled out,
The fuck you go a-beating on me for, Lily? He's the one with the damn message!
All of her mother's fury. I suddenly understand.
Lily Sr. whipped around to stand over the man while making grandiose hand gestures towards Garrett.
I can't just go a-beating the messenger. That's rude.
She paced a bit more before visibly calming down. She sighed and spoke sweetly.
I love you, Ragnar, but you don't know your manners sometimes.
She turned to face Garrett.
I apologize for that little outburst. It seems you ask one favor of someone and then they try to take the world from you. Now we got to plan a wedding for my niece.
She then extended a hand towards Ragnar, helping him back to his feet.
I can't believe they sent you all the way out here just to deliver that. Seems excessive, especially with this weather.
The truth was that Garrett was sent out because things were getting tense for him in Chicago. His growing information network had clued him in on a mistake that was made by a pack known as the Spreading Fire. When he confronted them with it, they took exception. Word began to spread that they were planning some sort of retaliation, so the elders used the message as an excuse to send Garrett away while they attempted to defuse the situation.
You'll stay for the feast tonight.
Thank you, Raya, but I must return to ship.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you mistake that as a request?
Lily Sr. walked over to a laundry basket and sifted through it.
And you won't be attending in those dirty wet clothes. Here, you look to be about the same size as my boy Olaf.
She tossed a few articles of clothing at Garrett. There were a freshly laundered pair of blue jeans, a blue button-up shirt, and a bright red jacket. It was a bit of a clown suit, but who was he to argue with the Raya?
Ulf, you'll have a spare room for the young crow here, yeah? He'll be using it tonight. Show him to it.
Ulf gave a slight bow of the head and turned to leave, motioning for Garrett to follow. Before they reached the door, a loud howl could be heard. For Garrett, it was strange to hear such a powerful howl in the Tellurian. In the dense city of Chicago, such a howl would bring unnecessary attention, and thus was forbidden. The howl itself was proud, yet full of sorrow. It was the kind of howl that signaled the fall of a warrior. Lily Sr. quickly darted past Ulf and Garrett and threw the door open. They followed. Not far from the Wormfoe's dwelling was a pack of 4 Garou entering the Sept courtyard. The one howling was in Lupus, while 2 were in Hamid. The 4th and final member of the pack wore the glabro form, and carried the body that the howl had announced. All of them were bloodied and disheveled from battle. Lily Sr. approached the pack, and they all bared their throats. She nodded in acknowledgement before speaking.
What happened, Amund?
One of the Hamid Garou, presumably Aemond, stepped forward to speak with a weary voice.
We were doing a regular sweep of the northwest when we encountered a spawn of the Red River Serpent trying to start a nest.
The wormfoe's hands balled up into white-knuckled fists as she responded with fury.
The Red River Serpent. The Sept of the Headwaters should have intercepted that thing long before it entered our territory.
Eamon's response, though still weary and sorrowful, betrayed the rage that boiled within him.
I know, Raya. But we did our duty.
Lily Sr. began to pace in a similar manner as she had done when calming herself after hearing Garrett's message.
Go on.
We fought the beast and Yaroslav dealt the final blow. But the serpent's venom continued to course through his veins.
The Guru in glabro form stepped forward and spoke with the same weariness as Eamon.
He died on the way back.
Lily Sr. approached Yaroslav's body. She sighed and tenderly brushed the long blood-soaked hair out of his face.
We'll give him a proper send-off before the feast, which will now be held in his honor.
She then turned to face Garrett with narrow eyes.
Young Crow, I've a mind to send you off right now to Lake Itasca with a message for those second-rate Guru in the Headwaters, but I think I'll be doing that myself soon. In the meantime, could you follow these warriors and help them construct the pyre?
Garrett gave a solemn nod.
Of course, Raya.
Garrett handed the borrowed clothes off to Ulf to drop off to his room, and then followed the grieving pack to the center of the sept. Everyone silently gathered wood and constructed the pyre, which consumed the remaining hours of daylight. The rest of the sept's inhabitants began to respectfully gather around the pyre as Yaroslav's packmates gingerly placed his body upon it. The light from the gibbous moon shined down upon Eamon as he addressed the congregation.
Yaroslav Tryggvason, son of Fenris, born under the full moon.
Eamon's voice began to tremble.
And my brother by blood.
At least Eamon can give a proper send-off. At least it wasn't by his hand.
Garrett sharply inhaled and shivered as the cold air bit his lungs. Eamon continued.
Our worm foe rends the flesh has decreed that tonight's feast shall be in Yaroslav's honor. And I can't think of a better gathering for the departed than that.
Several kinfolk stepped out from the crowd and handed lit torches to each of Yaroslav's packmates. The pack circled around the pyre and touched their torches to it, setting it ablaze. Eamon took a deep breath, pounded his chest, and raised his voice.
Yaroslav gave his life so that his pack may live. And I intend to honor that sacrifice by enjoying the fuck out of life tonight.
Eamon raised his fist into the air, and the rest of the sept followed his lead while unleashing a hearty battle cry. After a brief moment of silence, the crowd began to make their way towards the great hall, though some waited around to pay their last respects to Yaroslav. Garrett headed to Ulf's dwelling so he could change into the borrowed clothes as ordered. He also started a fire in the hearth and laid his own clothes nearby to get them dry. After changing, he returned to the great hall, which was now illuminated by a row of torches that formed a walkway to the large front doors. The flames fought a hopeless battle against the cold, but Garrett appreciated the tiny amount of warmth they provided as he entered the hall. The interior of the hall was enormous. Even with the entire sept occupying the inside, there was still plenty of room to maneuver without constantly bumping into other people or the long tables and benches that lined the floor. Kinfolk and Guru alike carried drinking horns and loudly mingled with one another, making the mood very lively. Garrett was clearly a fish out of water. The Tryggvasons were a clan of warriors, and his small stature was easily towered by the large majority of the clan. Every sept member that he could see, save for the few Lupus Guru, was dressed in full biker gear, leaving Garrett to stick out like a bright red fire truck in the borrowed clothes. Garrett scanned the room for Ulf or any other familiar faces. Instead, he saw the wormfoe waving both arms and whistling at him. When she knew she had caught Garrett's attention, she waved him over. Once Garrett got close, she pointed at a table that already had people seated at it and raised her voice to be heard over the crowd.
You'll be sitting over there, young crow. Now go, enjoy yourself.
Yes, Raya. Garrett made his way to the table and immediately recognized Ulf, Lily Jr., and the two girls she had been chasing earlier. The new faces included a few other typical Tryggvasons, and a young boy who didn't appear to be much older than the girls. The only open seat at the table was next to him. As Garrett sat down, Ulf raised his horn towards Garrett and spoke to the rest of the table.
Oi! This be the crow from Chicago.
The rest of the table raised their horns, save for Lily Jr., who had resumed the piercing stare she gave him during their brief encounter earlier. Garrett narrowed his eyes and was about to question the young girl, but had his attention diverted by a tap on his shoulder. He turned to face the culprit and was met with the stoic face of the boy he sat next to.
Oi, I have that same outfit.
A smirk crept up Garrett's mouth before he replied.
You must be Olaf.
The boy looked slightly shocked.
Aye? How'd you know?
Because this is your outfit.
Olaf nodded.
She got you too then.
Garrett nodded in return.
That she did.
I'd be looking like you if I hadn't been hiding from her all day.
Garrett lightly chuckled.
Smart. But have you thought about what's going to happen when she sees that you're out of dress code?
Olaf's posture stiffened, and his eyes widened. He let out a loud, or at least that's what it sounded like to the casual ear. Garrett had been watching and listening to people all his life, and it was clear Olaf's utterance meant so much more. Garrett swore he could even hear his words.
Oh boy, I sure hadn't thought of that. Suppose I'll be on latrine duty for the next 2 months while Lily laughs at my misfortune. Gonna smell like shit the entire time.
Garrett slapped Olaf on the back.
You'll be alright.
The rest of the table members laughed as kitchen workers made their rounds to each table, placing large family-style platters of food. The steaming hot vegetable dishes alone made it the finest meal Garrett had ever taken part in. Never mind the fine cuts of beef. After everyone served themselves and began to eat, Ulf spoke.
So, Cosma, is it true that Chicago is infested with leeches?
Garrett stopped chewing his food and looked up from his plate to see the table full of warriors. He slowly finished chewing and swallowed before he spoke.
Yeah, they're kind of everywhere. But outside of the occasional run-in, we generally keep to ourselves.
The rest of the table looked at each other in bewilderment before Ulf responded.
There a reason you haven't wiped them out like we have here?
Garrett put his utensils down and furrowed his brow.
You eradicated your leeches?
Oh, well, yeah. A leech doesn't dare set his foot in this area.
Garrett crossed his arms and looked up in thought.
I guess it makes sense. A lot of wilderness, the local cities aren't anywhere near as dense. Less places for them to hide, less infrastructure for them to infiltrate, less humans to feed from. Wouldn't quite work in Chicago, though.
Whoa, now. Are you saying we couldn't do the same in Chicago if we set our mind to it?
Garrett's eyes focused back on the people at the table and could see their cold stares.
Shit, they're waiting to pounce.
Of course they couldn't eradicate the vampires of Chicago. The war already proved that it would be fought to a standstill at best, and the leeches could just sink back into the shadows of the city, only to re-emerge at a later time. However, Garrett wasn't about to insult the Tryggvasons by even hinting that they weren't strong enough. He quickly thought about what to say to defuse the situation, and put a friendly grin on his face.
Look, all I'm saying is there wouldn't be a city left after you got done with it.
The Tryggvasons all relaxed and began to laugh, except Lily Jr., who continued to stare at Garrett as Ulf spoke.
I suppose you're right. We do tend to go a little overboard.
They continued to eat as others at the table conversed amongst themselves. Garrett did his best to eat, but could always feel the daggers of Lily Jr.'s gaze. Garrett stared right back at her as he finished the last remnants of his food.
What the hell is her problem?
Garrett opened his mouth to speak, but was interrupted by a fist slamming on the table that startled everyone seated. Garrett looked up to see an unfamiliar Tryggvason with a huge smile shouting across the table at everyone.
Guess what? It's Roland's birthday.
Olaf let out a sigh and spoke with a worried tone.
Oh boy, on tonight of all nights.
Garrett looked to Olaf.
What's the big deal? Is he gonna get a spanking?
Olaf shook his head.
Oh no, when it's someone's birthday, they get tested to see how long they can last in a fight before getting knocked down.
So they have to spar with someone. Doesn't seem so bad.
No, you don't understand. Every member of the Sept has the opportunity to try. And with everyone in their current mood, they're going to be extra motivated. Just look at Ingrid's face.
Garrett's eyebrows raised at the revelation. Olaf was right. Ingrid had pounded the table with sadistic glee, and her expression betrayed her desire to let out some steam.
Well then, glad my birthday was 3 days ago.
Ingrid's head quickly turned to face Garrett.
It's your birthday?
What? No, I said...
Ingrid ignored Garrett and turned to face the rest of the gathering.
Oi, it's the crow's birthday. Screw Roland. I can punch him anytime. I want the crow.
The great hall filled with cheers at the thought of a fresh victim to beat on.
Oh, shit.
Garrett was going to die. He was no stranger to beatings, But facing a horde of rowdy Fenrir and Furies was a whole other level of pain. Garrett raised his hands in a placating gesture.
Look, I can't.
Ingrid whipped around to face Garrett with a look of angry confusion.
You can't? What do you mean you can't?
Ingrid's booming voice overtook the gathering and stunned everyone into silence. She began to scan the room, looking for someone.
Oscar! Oscar! What the fuck, Oscar? I thought you said he was okay.
Oscar stood up from another table as all eyes fell upon him.
Don't look at me! What the fuck, Ulf? I thought you said he was okay!
The sound of shifting bodies echoed through the hall as Ulf became the focus. He looked around for a second before looking to Garrett with a pleading countenance.
What the fuck, Cosma? I thought you were okay.
Garrett shifted uncomfortably in his seat as the crowd waited for an answer. The birthday beating was clearly an important tradition if the threat of non-participation set off this harsh of a reaction. The consequences of offending an entire sept could be far worse than even the most vicious beating. Garrett would have to accept, but he also needed to say something to make up for the initial gaffe. He stood up to address the incensed crowd.
I just didn't want to ruin this fine clothing that was lent to me.
Garrett gestured to his current ridiculous attire that actually belonged to Olaf. He glanced over to the wormfoe, who gave him the clothing. Garrett's comment had caused her to look like the proud parent of a rebel child who had finally decided to return home and work in the family business. The rest of the sept looked to each other in silent confusion. Eventually, a small snicker came from the back of the crowd. A few more followed and slowly turned into laughter. From there, it spread like wildfire, and the hall was soon filled with hearty laughter from all except the wormfoe, who wondered what was so funny. Ingrid raised her horn and shouted to be heard over the ruckus.
A true Rotigar he is. Clear the way, make sure the beer flows. Forget about the woes and worries of the day. He's okay!
The rest of the Tryggvason clan raised their horns to Ingrid's toast and began to chant in unison.
He's okay! He's okay! He's okay!
The crowd worked like a practice crew, shoving tables to the sides of the hall to make room. A sea of hands urged Garrett forward until he stood alone in a clearing, surrounded by a barrier of people. The crowd across from Garrett began to part and revealed Ingrid shoving people aside as she pushed through to the circle. She made her way to the center, slowly spinning with outstretched arms, taking in the atmosphere that grew increasingly electric. She raised a single arm with her pointer finger extended and vigorously whirled it in a circular motion as she shouted,
Music!
Garrett couldn't see a band through the thick crowd, but he could definitely hear the sound of drums. More instruments came in, and soon the crowd began to clap their hands to the beat. Ingrid now faced Garrett with her eyes closed. Her body lightly swayed to the beat as her knees bent and her back arched forward.
This escalated quickly.
Sensing an imminent strike, Garrett quickly removed the borrowed jacket and shirt as the music began to swell. In the brief moment that Garrett's vision was obscured by the clothing coming over his head, Ingrid had opened her eyes wide and now bore a toothy, open-mouthed smile. She pounded the ground with both fists before launching herself towards Garrett and letting out a furious battle cry.
Shit!
Ingrid was so eager to hurt something that it made every move easy to telegraph. It was the only thing that allowed Garrett to avoid the initial flurry of lightning-quick strikes. The rest of the crowd was enjoying the show as Garrett searched in vain for an opening to retaliate, with some singing the praises of the fallen Yaroslav. Ingrid's physical superiority was just too much for Garrett, and after a valiant series of dodges, he finally took a powerful blow to his chin. Garrett's vision blurred as he fell to the floor. He pushed himself up to his knees before he felt himself being forcefully picked up to his feet, and was soon staring face to face with Ingrid. She gave Garrett light slaps on the cheek and placed her hands on his shoulders. She smiled as she spoke.
I'm too fast for you, Crow.
Garrett turned his head to the side and spit blood onto the floor before replying.
You're also too predictable.
Criticizing the skilled warrior that just beat him wasn't necessarily the smartest thing for Garrett to do, but he just couldn't help himself. Ingrid stuck out her lower lip and raised her eyebrows in surprise.
Maybe I wanted to play with my food too much. I'll give you that. Better get ready, though, because the rest are coming for you, too. And I'm getting back in line.
She gave him one final pat on the cheek before vanishing into the crowd. The next to emerge was a smiling Ulf. He cracked his knuckles and spoke.
Oh, congratulations, Cosma. You faced the Sept's strongest fury kinfolk and lived to tell the tale.
That was a kin?
Garrett managed to keep a straight face despite the shocking revelation.
That's because she was sloppy.
Oh, don't go saying mean things like that. I think she likes ya.
Ulf charged in for a fight that was over much quicker than the first. He laughed as he helped Garrett stand up and then left. Another challenger entered the ring and another fight was had. Garrett was severely outmatched in each fight and could never stay standing past the first hit. Each blow brought great pain and a desire to stay down. However, the Tryggvason clan refused to let him. In Chicago, the beatings were vicious, cruel, and ended with Garrett left on the ground in a disgraceful pile. In Two Harbors, each fall was met with an extended hand, a warm embrace, and sometimes an extremely unpleasant bearded kiss on the cheek. Some commended his ability to move, others gave him pointers. There was still the occasional wisecrack about his small frame, but they were always followed up by friendly slaps on the back. Eventually the beer ran out, the band stopped playing, and it became evident to all that the Sept's Shadowlord visitor had given them his all. The crowd began to thin out as people made their way out of the Great Hall and back to their dwellings. Garrett, exhausted, made his way across the Sept back to Ulf's home. Ulf himself was not there, more than likely continuing the party at someone else's home. The fire that Garrett had made earlier was now merely glowing embers, only giving off the slightest warmth. He stripped himself of the borrowed pants and shifted to Glabro before sitting in front of the hearth. He felt the pulsing pain of bruises and bumps fade away as the natural regeneration of the Garou worked its magic. Once he felt whole again, he shifted back to his Hamid form and made his way to the guest room where a bed with moose skin blankets awaited him. He climbed into the bed and should have fallen fast asleep, but he shivered while waiting for the blankets to retain his body heat, and he found his mind starting to wander.
You don't belong here. I'm leaving in the morning. Why wait? Want to say some goodbyes? You actually think you're welcome here? You're nothing but a novelty to them. A toy. I'm tired. What jester's costume will they put you in tomorrow? I'm cold. Leave now before the day. Before they find out how weak you really are.
Garrett threw off the blanket, got out of bed, then quickly put on his own dedicated clothes. The frigid wind bit into him when he opened the door to the outside, but Luna shined brightly in the sky and allowed him to shift to the lupus form. He slowly trotted to the southern edge of the Sept's ring, where he had originally entered. Garrett could remember the way back on his own, and there was a good chance he could make it back to the city of Two Harbors by dawn if he left now. Just before he entered the tree line, he heard someone speak from behind him.
Oi! Hold up!
He turned around to see Lily Jr. wrapped in a thick blanket and walking through the snow towards him. Garrett let out a grunt and then shifted to Hamid so that he could speak to the young kinfolk.
What? Not done trying to stare a hole through my head?
She stopped moving.
Look, it's not my fault you're the smallest gruel I ever seen. I was just trying to see what made you so special.
Garrett furrowed his brow.
What the hell do you mean by special?
Moonin seems to think you'll do great things someday. I just couldn't see how such a skinny Garou could possibly do anything like that.
Garrett sighed at the insult and wanted to just leave, but felt bound by his auspice to ask the next question.
Who's moonin'?
A hand emerged from Lily's blanket and pointed up, but Garrett saw no one.
My spirit buddy. Been hanging around with me as long as I can remember.
Huh. Why would I care about some random spirit speaking nonsense?
Oh, I thought it was nonsense at first too. But Moonin's smart. He usually knows what he's talking about, and I think he's right.
Garrett scoffed.
So what changed your mind? What did your constant glaring at me reveal?
Lily began to walk towards him.
The birthday beating.
Oh, really? Seeing the shit get kicked out of me convinced you of my greatness?
Lily chuckled.
Oh, don't get me wrong. You definitely got your ass handed to you, and you have a long way to go, but you actually lasted longer than some others. You endured.
Garrett didn't want to believe it. He couldn't believe that he would possibly amount to anything. Lily had been upfront with everything else, though, so why would she lie about one thing and not the other? Believing it would give him hope, and hope was a dangerous thing to have.
We'll see, I suppose.
Lily puffed up her chest and raised her voice.
Look, Moonin also said that we'd probably see each other again someday. That means I'd be getting out of this shithole someday, so maybe you don't want to listen to what he says, but I have to believe him.
Garrett's only response was to stare at her as she deflated from her agitated state. Once she calmed down, she broke the silence.
Just promise me you won't be a coward. Promise me you won't run from greatness.
Garrett took a deep breath, once again feeling the sting of the cold within him. He turned away to face the woods before replying.
I can't promise to know what greatness looks like. I can promise that I'll never let fear dictate my actions. That's a promise I made to myself.
He shifted back into Lupus and started to walk forward before he heard Lily cry out once more.
Wait!
She quickly ran in front of Garrett, blocking his way. She proceeded to unwrap the blanket from herself and throw it over Garrett's back. She grabbed two of the corners, brought them around his neck, and tied them into a knot.
Happy birthday.
Garrett's head raised in surprise at the sudden gift. Lily shivered in the cold and ran back into the sept towards her home before Garrett could think of a proper response. He stood there in stunned silence until he felt Lily's residual warmth still coursing through the blanket. It was a small comfort as he began his journey back through the cold woods. Back to Chicago.